Hello, animation fans, and welcome to another iAnimate podcast. I'm your host, Larry Vasquez, and you're listening to episode 73. In this episode, we have Scott Holmes joining us. Scott has been in the animation industry for about 2 decades and is one of our creature animation instructors here at iAnimate. He's worked on such films as Ant-Man and Wasp, Lord of the Rings, The Twin Towers, Monster House, Pacific Rim Uprising, and Detective Pikachu. Having Scott in on this podcast, where he's worked in the industry for many years, worked on some really cool films, as well as being one of our instructors, it was just a really neat opportunity to talk about animation, to pick his brain, and to see what he enjoys about working in the VFX and creatures realm here. So definitely check out this podcast. All right. Scott, I'd like to first thank you for joining us in this podcast, particularly during these kind of crazy times. It's neat to, I think, for people that are particularly quarantining them, having to be quarantined, it's a cool opportunity to still hear animation and still talk about animation. So I think this is a good opportunity. So again, we appreciate your time in this podcast.
Yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure, actually. It's cool.
Awesome. I'm sure it's probably a little easier to get some of your time right now, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well, you've been with us for quite some time, both in, I think, the feature side of animation for our feature classes earlier on, and then you went pretty quick into the creature portion of our animation paths. Can you tell us how you got into animation? What was that kind of initial spark and why you wanted to get in?
Yeah, I mean, I started in the industry a really long time ago on Flubber, and I started as a roto artist.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so there was this little, one of the characters called Weebo was this little robot, and so I had to roto that out of it had a giant armature attached to it, and so we'd roto it. They would paint out the armature and then comp back in the Weebo. So that's how I got started. And then after I did all the Weebo rotomation, it was roto, they assigned me to this Godzilla trailer. I don't know if you remember, it was Roland Emmerich's one, and it was Godzilla's foot smashes through the museum and crushes T-Rex.
Uh-huh.
So they shot that practically with this rig, this metal rig, and I had to roto all the glass in front of it.
Oh, goodness.
So they could comp it back onto the Godzilla foot. But 2 things about that shot is I learned how to track things in motion, because if you rotoed it how it actually moved, it was easier to do. So if you understood how glass moved through space. And also I got to see some cool foot animation, which inspired me to I want to do that as soon as I can. So I comped on Godzilla, was only a comp artist. And as soon as it was over, they were starting Stuart Little, and I asked to move into the animation department. I had no experience, no training, nothing. I had taken some animation in school, but I was an illustration major. My teacher was all experimental, so it was all under camera, stop motion stuff. So I started on Stuart Little, and our job wasn't the mouse, it was the cats. So we got to do cat faces, which at the time was cool for me because I just got to focus on facial animation, dialogue, acting, eyes, all that other stuff. And then at night, I put myself through school. So there was the union, I took classes, and then there was a very small school called Associate in Arts that was around at that time. I don't think it's around anymore. And I took animation classes there. So I took traditional 2D, hand-drawn animation, and in-betweening, and assistant, and cleanup, and all of those classes while I was working in the day. So that's how I got into that department. Yeah.
So you're getting training on the side or outside, and then as well as inside, having to jump into the deep waters of working on this cat for Stuart Little.
Yeah, we were doing soft image at the time, so we weren't even Maya. And I was learning how to animate on a computer at the same time learning how to animate, learning how to do dialogue. Richard Williams didn't have a book out at the time, so I had to do the Preston Blair version. And Illusion of Life. So I was immersed in trying to learn as much as I could about animation from all the sources I had. Back then it was frame by frame on VHS. I would spend hours just frame by framing. Tex Avery and Disney and Ralph Bakshi. Don't ask me why, but I love Ralph Bakshi movies. So yeah, that's how I got started. And then there was, I don't know if you remember, but there was all this underground information too. So you'd get you'd get Eric Goldberg had this paper that before he published his book, he would have these papers that would run around. You'd get a hold of those.
Yeah.
You'd try to memorize those as quick as possible. And Glenn Keane drawings, he would have stuff that would get handed around through people. So yeah, that was how I got into it. Was I just saw a piece of animation, and Andy Jones was on it, who's now he just finished Lion King. He was an animator, senior animator on Godzilla.
Okay.
But I got to see what he did. He did like half of that movie by himself.
Wow.
He was so fast. His animation was so fast. He was so good. And he also rigged. I don't know if people know that. So he wasn't happy with the rig, so he would just rig it himself, create shelves. There's a couple people I've run across in the industry like that. Jason Schleifer at Weta was the same way.
Yeah.
He was running simulations on Gollum's rope while animating Gollum, while rigging Gollum. Like, I'm just trying to make a decent scene, and these guys are doing everything.
You're like, slow down, you're making this all look bad.
Yeah.
That's actually one thing nice about our industry is that how much we're willing to share information and learn from one another. I've talked to other people in other industries, and they're always kind of surprised at how open our industry is. So I know some of these other guys have been real open about their stuff. And Jason Schleifer actually, I remember he did that rigging for animators tutorial, really inexpensive some time back. And so, yeah, it's always very nice in our industry that people are willing to share their info.
Yeah, I've never run across anybody that hasn't shared info. If you ask, they're more than willing to tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I like about it. The problem is asking. A lot of animators don't feel like they can ask, or they get intimidated, or you just have to go up and ask, because they're all regular people, and nobody finds it easy. Even a guy who I thought was easy, everything he did looked great. He says he struggles, but so.
That's actually really good to know, because then when you're struggling, you aren't the outlier,
No. Every time I start a scene, I feel like I've forgotten everything I've learned in 20 years.
Like, okay, get those wheels turning again, huh?
Yeah, it's just every scene seems new. No matter, I have a workflow I perfected over the years. I've worked really hard at my workflow, and sometimes I just throw it out the window. Don't ask me why. I'll just start a scene in a whole new way.
Yeah, for no apparent reason, huh?
For no reason. And eventually it works out. But what are you doing? You have a workflow. I don't know. That's
yeah.
Me, though.
Now, you said you started in rotoscoping. What was it that drew you to the entertainment business?
So I lived in LA at the time. So it was almost like bound to happen. I graduated with a degree in illustration. I was freelance illustrating.
Okay.
But I had a kid and a wife, so I needed a job. And I got into graphic design, and it was this really small desktop publishing company. And I started working in just outputting film. That was my job. I was down in the basement outputting the film for the graphic designers upstairs. Eventually, I got into graphic design, and then I met a guy, a really good friend of mine named Nelson, and he left that company to go work at CineSite in LA.
Okay.
As a compositor. And then eventually he went to Centropolis, and then he said, "Hey, you should go do this. It's really cool. You would love it." So I said, sure, because it sounded more interesting than the hip hop magazine I was at. That had run its course.
Okay.
So I just left and went into Roto. So it was almost by accident.
Okay.
But at the same time, it seems inevitable when you're in LA.
Okay. So what were some of your first gigs after Stuart Little? Did you stay, because was that a Sony one?
No, I was at Centropolis at the time.
Okay.
So it was a Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin company, and they had
Okay.
a visual effects company I was there for about 4 years. So I worked on Stuart Little, and then we did a project called Eight-Legged Freaks, which was this big spider movie, which had I forgot her name. Very young actress at the time, and she's now Black Widow. I forgot her name. What's her name?
Oh, Scarlett Johansson.
Yes. So she was in it as a kid.
Oh, okay.
And it had anyway, but there were these giant spiders, and it was a Roland Emmerich protege, this guy that they had found in Australia, and he pitched a script, and they bought it, and they ended up making it. And it was like a B movie horror thing on purpose.
Okay.
And so I did that. And that's when I really got into creatures because I've been at the company so early, I kind of asked for a sequence to myself and they gave it to me, which probably wouldn't happen nowadays. I've been very lucky with people giving me things. Okay. So there was a scene where a tarantula attacks a trailer.
Okay.
I had to do that by myself.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then we did Patriot. And that's my first introduction to Mocap, which I hated at the time, but now I realize it's a tool. It's actually a pretty useful tool.
Very cool.
But at the time I was so like, I hate Mocap. But I've come to love it. And then what else did we do there? And then I worked on Scorpion King and then left to go to Warner Brothers to work on Scooby-Doo, the first one.
Okay. Gotcha.
And we did Scrappy Rex, and that's where I met Richie Bainham, who eventually became an animation director at Weta, and I followed him down there and worked on the second Lord of the Rings.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I was looking at
that was super cool. Yeah. Because everybody wanted to do Gollum, and I didn't. I don't know why. And I really wanted a troll shot. But they gave me Ents and a Treebeard, which was cool because I met this guy named Shaggy who's now at DreamWorks. He's like,
yeah. I met him before.
Yeah, and he's super cool. And what I like most about him is he's all about performance. So if you talk to him about animation, he'll talk about performance. No matter how hard you try to talk to him about like technical animation things, he always comes back to performance.
Gotcha.
That's all he cares about.
So is that something you kind of rubbed off on you from him?
Yeah, it's when I figured out, well, I'd kind of known in the back of my head, but he really solidified that all animation is performance and story. Everything else is secondary. I mean, the principles are the principles, and that's all important and everything. But if you tell a good story, that's more important than anything. And he was also the first to tell me that story is important in like creature animation outside of feature animation.
Gotcha.
So, story always gets associated with Pixar, Disney, that kind of stuff. But he was all about that. Even the silliest creature shot is a story shot. And that's the way you should approach it. So, yeah, that's cool. That's what I got out of him. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's now, did you have a tough time transitioning to some of the creature work that you had, like the tarantula? Because you mentioned that from Stuart Little, you'd done mostly facial type stuff, or did you have to put in some extra work too to get the creature stuff down?
Yeah, I've had to put into extra work into everything I've done, even now.
That's what I like. That's what I'm getting, and I like that because it's one of those things that hard work pays off.
Yeah, I didn't go to animation school, so every single thing is difficult for me. So whenever I do a shot, I do a ton of research, and it's kind of what I pride myself on now.
Okay.
And I still study animation to this day. I'm still frame by framing. I'm still learning from people. I still watch Jason Ryan videos,
Nice.
I watch other teachers' videos on iAnimate. So yeah, I'm always studying. So the tarantula one, exactly that. There was a research paper that we had. There was a book that I read about locomotions in arachnids, and they had the zigzag pattern of the feet.
Oh, okay.
And they also explained how the forefront feet pull and the back forefeet push.
Push, okay.
The middle ones are like steer ones.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, once we kind of understood that, and once we kind of understood that there's no side to side like a human, and but we had to make it feel heavy in other ways, so we had secondary on the tail or the abdomen part. So yeah, so every single film I've come across, I've had to do research. Like the troll shot, I had to shoot reference, and that was kind of my first experience shooting reference. And even to this day, we just finished a show. The Shadow Creatures, and so
which one?
Lock and Key. We did the Shadow Creatures on episode 10 for Lock and Key for Netflix.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, so I did a lot of research on shadow creatures and horror and blah, 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 and all this other stuff just to kind of get my head around how they move and stuff like that. And we shot a ton of reference for that as well. So yeah, everything I do, I do a lot of research. It's like number one thing I do. And then I still study. I'm still a student. I don't think you ever get like where you don't have to learn.
Right. Not in this industry, huh?
Bad news for everybody. You'll be studying forever. But that's part of it. That's part of the fun.
Yeah. That's what I said. It's a double-edged sword. I've mentioned that before, where it's what makes it exciting and fun, but it's also what makes it challenging because you never feel like you're on solid ground or for very long. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
I got to keep
yeah.
ramping up and keep learning.
Yeah, because everything you do, you have to get your head around, right? No matter what it is, it's
Yeah,
always a challenge. The director always wants it different. That's always like the primary brief is I want something cool and different. So 9 times out of 10, that means they want 3/4 of it the same as something they've seen before and a little bit different.
gotcha.
People aren't people aren't really down for really different. That's
So
but
increments there, huh?
yeah, you got to increment things. But yeah,
Now, from so the last one that you were talking about, there was you're at sorry, what was
oh,
it called
Weta.
again?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Weta.
so you're at Weta. So you worked on the Twin Towers.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which was super cool. Basically, I did Treebeard with Shaggy. He was a lead.
Hmm.
And then I did a lot of end stuff, like VizDev for the ends, all the motions, runs, walks. And then we plugged those into Massive. And so that's how all the crowd things were done for that. That was my first introduction to Massive. I think they just developed it for those movies.
Gotcha.
And then I did a lot of, we did a whole bunch. It wasn't just me. The whole team did a bunch of what they called vignettes. So Peter Jackson didn't have any idea how he wanted the Battle of Isengard to go down. Nothing was storyboarded. Nothing was scripted. So he just asked the animation department to come with vignettes of action, like Ents fighting people. And then he picked which ones he wanted and worked those up. And then those eventually became shots.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And then for the wide shots, we would just place those same vignettes kind of around randomly. And that's how some of the wide shots were created.
Okay, very cool. Do you feel like you had a little more ownership on some of that stuff, kind of coming up with ideas for it?
Yeah, that was cool because the Ents were, they were old. So they all had to move kind of rickety, but they all had to move a bit different. One was more aged than the other one. One had a bad leg. Like we all came up with these kind of internal stories for what trees, how their locomotion would be, and kind of their personality. One was a bit dumber than the other one, or that kind of scenario, just so we could get around. So they all moved different. They didn't just move like the same. So yeah, that was my first introduction to kind of ownership, taking ownership of all of those Ents, because all the other animators were busy on Gollum.
Okay.
And other stuff, and I was the only free animator to do some development animation for the trees, which was cool.
Very cool. Anything in particular you learned working with Peter Jackson during that time?
He likes wide angle lenses, 18s, 16s.
Okay.
Yeah, I did this really difficult shot that it turns out wasn't that difficult, but he was super particular about the camera. And the biggest lesson I got out of working at Weta was to treat the camera like you're a real person. If you try to do anything CG or with a locator where you're spinning it, he reacted poorly to that.
Okay.
So he wanted everything to feel like it was an actual person or a helicopter or a crane or a dolly. So all the camera moves had to feel real. They would move in one direction, like translate in one direction, and then you could rotate kind of on a tripod up and down. You wouldn't add no Z rotation ever on any of his shots. That might have changed with drones and everything. But at the time, the biggest takeaway I got from working with Peter Jackson, because I got to work with Peter Jackson on this one shot because he was super particular about it, and his right-hand man, Christian, who was like his lead storyboard artist guy who was the closest to Peter Jackson, was he used wide-angle lenses all the time. That was his favorite. And that all the camera moves had to feel real.
Gotcha.
Computery, which was, at the time for me, it was eye-opening because I had never heard that. You hear it all the time now. You know?
Yeah.
But at the time, I had never heard it to the point where I even made this guy that was 6 feet tall, and I mounted the camera on his shoulder like he was shoulder mounted, and I did all my shots that way through the guy. Just to try to get that feel and get
nice
how a real camera works. Yeah.
Very cool. Any particular things, you mentioned working with Shaggy there at Weta, any other things that kind of were not necessarily, like you said, eye-opening, but just brought maybe clarity or something was unique there, during your time there?
Well, the Shaggy's performance was eye-opening, but I sat to a guy who did work on one of the Gollum shots named Mike Murphy, who's a really talented animator, and I saw how he approached the shots, like their approach to Gollum. was that they basically rotoscoped Andy Serkis's performance, and then Peter Jackson wasn't happy. So then they pushed it, and what they found was the more they pushed the facial animation, the more broad it got, the more alive it felt. So the more they actually did one-to-one with Andy Serkis, it didn't read, but the more they pushed in the cartoony realm, it read better. And that's something that I've been trying to preach to everybody to this day, that I know it might look weird when it's in the play blast of Maya, but push those poses even more, push that dialogue, push that jaw a little more open, push the corners out. Because when all the texture's on it and the lighting's on it and all that other stuff is on it, it kills it.
Gotcha.
So that might be different now with Ziva and new facial systems, because you're firing muscles and everything. But at the time, we didn't have any of that. So we had to fake muscle jiggle, and we had to fake extremes and stuff to get the weight across. But I still say, like, push facial, because it reads, it's more clear. Go out of what is real, per se. And start to caricature it a bit. And that was the biggest eye-opening thing I learned there, was that real isn't necessarily real. Real is what reads as clear.
Very cool. Yeah. I mean, people, I know it did really well. The Lion King, but I think that was one of the difficulties I had with such a movie like that, where you've got these talking animals, but that just aren't as very expressive, because they were trying to keep it more on the realistic side. Whereas if you maybe changed it up a little bit, design wise, it would give you the opportunity to push it a little bit more. And then you go into that realm of performance a little more, I think.
That was my problem with the Jungle Book and Lion King. Was I wish that, I know, and it's risky, right? I get it. There's millions and millions of dollars under these movies. And you don't want to listen to some animator going, let's push it and see how it goes. But I just think it would read better, and it would be more entertaining. And that's really what I like about this business, is I get to entertain. Whenever I'm done with my shot, I always sit back, I move back a little bit, and I say, is that shot entertaining? Like, is it boring? How can I push it? Am I missing a trick? It's one of the things I learned when I went to London to work at DNEG, was I worked with Eamon Butler, and that was always his thing.
Gotcha.
Like, I think we're missing a trick.
Oh, funny.
So I always ask myself that. Am I missing a trick? Like, what would Eamon say? Because he was a weird kind of guy who, he could walk by your desk, look at your shot, play once, and be like, you're missing a trick, do this, and you do it, and you're like, oh my God, that looks amazing. And then he walks off. Told you. He just knows. The same thing with Goldberg. When I worked on these Disney commercials with Eric Goldberg, he would watch it once, hit play, like hit the stop, okay, and then start doing all these doodles to fix your shot. I'm like, I've watched that hundreds of times, and he would make it better. So that's what I wish they would do in those things, is push them a little bit, like take a risk, just push the face just 20%, and read and be more entertaining.
I'll definitely have to link. We did early on, and Jason Ryan joined me in that podcast, because he's a longtime friend of Eamon. But we did a podcast with him. I forget when, but I'll link it into with this bio. That was a really, really cool podcast. And it's kind of funny now, because he's at CineSite, and I know he's in London, but you're obviously at CineSite as well. So it's just always kind of one of those things that's, you see how the industry kind of works that way.
Yeah, he hired me.
Oh, okay.
He called me up. He said, I need a head of animation in Montreal.
Very cool.
I wanted to offer it to you first before I give it away.
Oh, that's killer.
Yeah. I was like, okay. Yes. I will do that.
Is Double Negative where you also worked with David Hubert?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. Because I know you worked with him as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a cool time. They were small at the time. They were in their little building. And we had some great animators. I was so lucky on Paul, because I was a lead on Paul. So my Anim Soup was this guy, Anders Beer, who's awesome.
I think I've heard the name.
Yeah. He did this short thing called Los Gringos, which is super cartoony facial animation. Did all blend shape. It's years old. It's very, very old, but it's aged well. It's still very good. Very good friend of mine, really super talented. Another one of these rigger, modeler, super genius guys who can do everything. So he was a soup. He was great to work with. And then this guy, Dave Lowry, was the other lead. And then the animators we had under us are now in the industry, and they're all like leads and soups and all super talented. Or David, like guys like David.
Yeah, yeah.
Running that whole studio.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I did Hellboy 2 in London.
Okay.
Came over for, I did all the Tooth Fairy stuff. I focused on that. And then we did Paul, which was amazing.
What did you enjoy about that one?
That one was pure performance. So it was great because the director didn't know VFX.
Okay.
The director didn't know animation. So whenever he looked at he was the director from Superbad, right? Greg
okay.
Miller. So he was a comedy guy.
Gotcha.
So he saw Paul as his character, and he was an actor, and all of his notes were performance. He didn't care if the arm was out of arc or your paw. He didn't care. He's like, that's his actor, and how is he relating to the other actors in the shot? That's all he cared about, was how that ensemble worked as a group. And some of his favorite shots were just Paul listening, like how Paul would listen. So because he's smarter than everybody because he's an alien, right? So he already knows what's going to happen, and he's thought all the stuff out. So whenever someone else is talking, the other actors, he's kind of irritated and bored, like, all right,
just finish up here.
Can we finish up? Because I know what we're going to do. And we're going to do what I want because I know what's happening. So, yeah. But that's what I loved about that show, was it was pure performance. It was all reference. It was the first time where it was heavily, heavily referenced. I think at the time, nobody was really doing a lot of video reference. I know it's very popular now, but at the time, I think there were only a few of those videos that people would put out where they shot their reference and then
gotcha.
those shot progression things. I think there was one or two people who did that. And we did reference, and that was my big eye-opening moment for reference, that the work improved greatly. We would do like 13, 14 takes of one shot, and then the anim soup could go through and pick what he liked about what take or what bits and piece, and we cut it together. So we didn't do any blocking. We would just do all video reference, and that's kind of how it was decided.
Did you like that approach?
I loved it.
Okay, because that would seem like that would save some time getting your, like you said, that's almost kind of your blocking pass, so to speak, because you're at least getting that kind of approved where you can now kind of run more into maybe a blocking plus or something like that. Yeah,
I loved it because I could get my performance across and get my ideas worked out in my own head.
Yeah.
Like without doing any work on the machine. It would take me half a day, maybe a day at worst, of just doing takes, cutting it, going back, cutting it, like all that. We had a really good system worked out. We had these video cameras that don't exist anymore that you could just shoot video and they would plug right in with a USB and then download. I forgot what they were called. They were super handy.
Oh, like a flip camera or
yeah.
I remember those.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, it's something like that.
So we did that. We took all the takes, and then I had this weird technique that I don't recommend to anybody, where I would just copy every 8 frames of my video reference, and that was my blocking pass.
Gotcha.
For me, it worked. For Dave, he had to pull out all the extremes and then the in-betweens he wanted, and then that was his blocking pass.
Gotcha.
So everybody kind of had their approach to how to use reference. And I don't recommend the 8-frame thing to anybody anymore because I tried it on Hop and it didn't work. I used the same thing on Hop. I used video reference. Again, very easy. I showed my suit, the ref. He's like, cool. And then the blocking pass, and then it was done. It really helped my workflow quite a bit. That was nice. Really eye-opening because I used to struggle. I do thumbnails, all the traditional approaches. As soon as I started using reference, it was a lot easier for me because everything I do is reality-based because it's all with live-action plates. It's not cartoony.
Gotcha.
So the timing has to be real world. The weight has to be real world. Everything has to be real world. So it's a bit different. So that reference is super key to what I do.
Gotcha.
I don't do anything without reference now.
Gotcha. Okay. So now, do you feel like doing it on the 8s? Okay, let me back this up. Okay, and I'll explain here. I took a workshop with Tal Schwartzman, and he kind of talked about how his new workflow at Pixar versus at DreamWorks, and he was there, changed things up a little bit, and he used reference as an example. And whereas at DreamWorks, when he worked on something like Rise of the Guardians, they were almost, every other or 4 frames. And so it became more about the motion of what you're taking from your reference. Whereas what he was doing at Pixar became more about the performance. And so he wasn't looking so much for every, 4 frames on his reference. It was kind of like where, like you said, maybe like Dave Hubert, when it's kind of where my golden poses and storytelling poses. Did you find that out for why you didn't, the 8, maybe on 8s didn't work, and you're now looking more for, okay, where are my storytelling poses?
Yeah, so on Hop, it was a bit more cartoony, and that's what I found out. So if I did it on 8s like I did on Paul, it felt real, it felt natural, but it felt like me.
Okay.
You
in a bunny suit or something?
Yeah, I did the chicken, the big
yes.
over the top tyrant chicken thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I forgot his name at the time. But yeah, so I had a big performance thing for him. And that's where I figured out the 8s don't work because it is real world timing and you want to fake it a bit.
Gotcha. Okay.
So when you're doing cartoony stuff, you do want to push those poses. And I'm not the best actor in the world is something else I realized on Paul. So a lot of times I would shoot reference of other people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this guy named Dave Lowry was the other lead Irish animator, really great, really talented. And he did the best Paul reference. And a lot of it was because his shoulders and elbows, he was really shouldery. So Paul's really like this, like, hey, and Dave's really like that.
Okay.
And then when Dave got busy animating shots, we would just pretend we were Dave, and it kind of worked. So,
no longer pretending that you're Paul, you're pretending like you're Dave.
You're Dave, because he was Paul. But yeah, so on Hop, it didn't work because it needed to be pushed. And to this day, I don't really do the 8s thing anymore.
Okay.
Unless it's realistic.
Okay.
Then it does work. And it's easy to break down because then you can go to 4s and 2s and what have you.
Okay.
Because more things are stylized now, even though shadow creatures we did were a bit stylized, they were a little faster, and when they looked too real, they were a bit boring.
Gotcha.
So we push poses now and stuff. So that's why I don't recommend the 8s like I used to.
Okay.
I recommend just getting your general timing from your reference, I think is good.
Yeah.
But pushing your poses and experimenting. And I always say the in-between should be straight animation, shouldn't be reference driven.
Gotcha.
That's
okay.
my personal take. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And to me, the in-betweens are where the fun is. Like you get to break an elbow here, you get to bend a wrist here, you get to cheat things or drag a jaw. I'm a big fan of dragging a jaw. During a head turn, I'll even break it and pull it and do all kinds of weird, super cartoony things just to see if I can. Yeah. So I do that a lot. I try to see if I can get away with things. Like I sneaky. You know?
Okay. No one notices, and that means that you did your job, right?
I did a good job.
That's right.
That in there, but I like to be entertaining, and I like to entertain myself. So sometimes I like to see what I can get away with in a shot. Yeah.
Now, do you approach motion capture the same way with reference that you get your maybe your golden story poses in there, and maybe even more if you need to, like you said, if it's more realistic, you can get your 8s, and then now I don't use it anymore. I'm using it, my animation skills to really push it.
Yeah. So I guess there's this thing called an override layer. You heard about that?
Yeah, in Maya.
Yeah. So once I discovered the override layer, that's exactly what I did. So I would just copy all of my golden poses from my mocap and a couple of key in-betweens, especially height in-betweens for weight, like the downs and stuff like that and the ups.
Okay.
So I'd capture a lot of those, and then I would just hide the main mocap and just start tweaking all of the in-betweens myself to make it more entertaining.
Okay.
To me, it's all about timing as far as reality goes. If you want it to feel real and look real, it's timing.
Okay.
It's not necessarily, you can get away with a lot as far as poses go. But if it's timed correctly, it'll feel real.
Okay. Yeah. I noticed some of the stuff that you worked on the, what was it called? Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
Some big robots and monsters, things like that. So
yeah, a lot of that is keyframe. It's not mocap.
Okay. Very cool.
I tend to, I was on the creature team on Pacific Rim. So I did all the monsters were all keyframed, and I shot reference again for that.
Very cool.
Myself. And then the robots were mocapped, but the shots I got weren't.
Okay.
Like I just keyframed them because we didn't have a run for that particular robot. So I just did one, and then it worked out.
Nice.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming again on those ones there, the timing has to be different to give that sense of weight and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, they try. It's funny because So ILM had like a year and a half to do the first Pacific Rim.
Okay.
And we had 6 months to do the second one.
Okay.
So that's why they wanted to do mocap, which I get. But it's not a matter of just stretching it out to make it feel heavy. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
That's where you start.
Uh-huh.
But then you have to fix all the in-betweens and hold a little longer. It's because it's basically physics, right? Once it moves fast through the arc, just like a regular arm. It just takes longer on the other end to kind of slow it down before it can change direction. So
Gotcha.
You steal a couple frames from the middle and you add it on the end. Same thing with the up and down. You do the same thing. Like when he starts coming down for the step, he can go a little faster, but then he's got to take a couple frames to take that step. And as he pushes up, he takes a couple frames. But when he's coming up, you can take a couple frames away. So I call it surgery.
Okay.
Like you go in there and you kind of just tweak things a little bit to get it to work, but you try not to destroy it too much. Otherwise, you're just going to end up animating. Motion capture is like a house of cards. You can only mess with it so much before you're just going to end up keyframing everything.
Yeah, before it's no longer motion capture. Huh?
Yeah. So, I worked on Beowulf back in the old days.
Okay.
Yeah, which was an interesting experience because it was at Sony. It was Zemeckis who believed in mocap like a religion.
Okay.
So you didn't want to change it, but it didn't work, right? So you had to change it just enough to make it work without him noticing.
Yeah. Okay. He's like, see, motion capture works. You're like, well, I kind of.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The feet were going through the floor and flipping. But the mocap team fixed all that, but we had to really spruce it up and make it entertaining.
Gotcha.
It was dead. It looks like bad roto, like bad route backshoot roto.
Okay.
Back then, it's much better now. But back then, it didn't. It really lacked a lot of life. So we had to put all that in there. But there were 4 rigs in that thing. It was like the mocap rig. There was a mocap offset rig, and then there was some other mocap separate rig, and then there was an animation rig. So if you wanted to animate, you had to bake all 4 of those rigs onto the animation rig. But you were still carrying those 4 rigs around.
So it was super slow?
It was super slow. Yeah. So I was on that show, and it reminded me of back when I was on Stuart Little.
Okay.
Back in the day about how slow everything was. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I do love that you just said, because it cracks me up, is that you said, still a little bit of frames here and a little bit, move them over here. That is one of the things I've really enjoyed kind of learning about how even in a 24, frames for a second, just even one frame difference, all of a sudden it's like, it works now. You know, and so it's one of the things that kind of cracks me up because you never think, 1/24 of a second would make a difference. And sure enough, it does. So when you start talking about, I'm going to take a little bit here and move it over here, and amazing.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's probably the note that I give the most that drives my animators crazy, or like my team, is like, can you add a frame there? And they always look at me like, are you kidding me? Like, please.
Just trust me. Yeah.
Try it, please. And they do. And they're like, I added a frame. I'll go, okay, cool. I love it. But it really does make a difference,
It does.
If your character's too bouncy, or you can try to tweak the curve and tone it down, but sometimes that's not enough, and all you need is just one more frame, and then it works.
Yeah.
And that stuff really, really matters, and that's the hardest lesson I had to learn. One of the hardest ones is that there's nothing free in CG. I know people think there is, but you're responsible for every frame. Every part of that character, all the way down to the fingers and the toes, everything's your responsibility, and everything has to be touched. If a control isn't touched, you're not doing your job. In general, there are some controls that are in there that don't need to be touched, but in general, everything should be looked at as a drawing. I still think of it as drawings.
Right.
I still try to communicate. Every single frame has to tell a story.
Gotcha.
It has to have a purpose, or it does something.
Right.
So they all matter. They're all your babies.
That's right. It's like herding cats, right? You gotta...
Yeah, exactly. They're all your kittens. Take care of them.
Now that was, so you said you worked on Pacific Rim there, Hellboy 2. Were those both at the same company, or am I?
So I left for a while. I have a really odd career.
I was going to say, I've noticed that to a degree. You've been in London. You're now in Montreal. You've been in LA. New Zealand?
Yeah. So I went to, after I went from, oh God, I went to New Zealand. I went back to LA to close a couple companies, which was trippy. It was that time when companies were closing.
So you had to go there to help finish it up?
No. So I went to Centropolis. They were working on Matrix 2, and then they just closed. So I was there for the big meeting, like, hey, we're no longer around. Then I got a job at CineSite, and I did this thing with Chris Bailey, which was Freddy versus Jason. It was Freddy as a caterpillar, and he was smoking a bong. It was cool. Nobody's ever seen it. It's probably my favorite thing I've ever animated. That was cool. And then they closed. Hey, we're closed. So 2 companies in a row shut down.
Oh, man.
And then I went to England and worked at Double Negative because, or maybe that was after. I don't know. I might have been mistaken. I went there, and then I came back and I worked at Nickelodeon as a TV animation director, which was interesting.
What were some of the projects you worked on there?
I did a thing called Robot and Monster, and then I did another one called Wally Kazam, 2 seasons of that.
Okay. What'd you enjoy about working in television?
It was interesting because basically they do storyboards and then they ship them to India, and then they animate it, and then they send it back to me, and I have to review all of their shots. So they're 22-minute episodes.
Oh my goodness.
They're 11-minute episodes, and there's 22 of them. I forgot what it was, but it's hours and hours of footage, right? So that was kind of my training ground for being a supervisor. Was I had to review so much work in such a short amount of time. And it also made me understand money, because there's only so many passes you can do.
Gotcha.
Before it doesn't become cost effective.
So you learn to be really efficient on where you give the notes and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. You target your notes. You do drawovers to be very clear, and you only call back a shot. We call it a callback. You only call back a shot that you think you can fix in a day.
Okay.
And make it better, and that you don't think they can do. So there were all these kind of criteria about why you could call back a shot and when. And I tried to call back as many as I could, just because I knew I was fast and I could fix them in a day.
Okay.
But they kind of put the kibosh on that. They're like, it's too many, half. So yeah, but it was a lot. It was fun. I learned a lot. The team was great. I learned because I hung out with all the storyboard artists. I got to see how they work. I got to see how the producer works, a supervising producer. And one thing I learned there is they're all just super passionate about what they do, even though it's TV. It's just the same as film. It's absolutely zero difference. And it was a super cool crew. It was great. It was one of the best experiences I've had, but I've also worked the hardest I've ever worked, just physically focusing. It was all about concentration. It wasn't about actually animating, but it was about learning to see animation and trying to see what to fix and how to pinpoint, if you make this change, it works better. And some of the shots were just horribly broken because they're under tight deadlines. And so sometimes they just give you stuff just to make us happy. And so, yeah.
Well, that's one of the cool parts about having you as an instructor here, is that's essentially what you're doing with students here anyway. You're pinpointing areas that are working, pinpointing areas that need work, and this is how to fix it. And
that's what was good about that, is I learned how to actually see animation, and how to fix it and how to adjust and how to communicate that effectively.
That's awesome.
How to speak about animation in a way that is clear and not confusing. Like,
gotcha.
That looks weird.
Fix it.
That doesn't help, right? That looks weird. So yeah, that was cool. And then I went. I taught at a college for 3 or 4 years, which was interesting.
So got more training ground as a instructing, right?
Yeah, I got a lot of training on instructing. It was a private college, and I had to do budgets and develop the whole curriculum. So I had to write a 4-year curriculum for an animation program, start to finish, including storyboarding and rigging and modeling and character design and the whole A to Z, which was cool for me. I got to do that and put my stamp on it, and the school's still there and doing well.
Nice. Now you're talking about just variety of your career. That was back in LA working on the television stuff?
Yeah. And then I went to Buffalo, New York to do the teaching thing.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So, and then that's how I ended up in Montreal.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to get back in the industry, and I worked briefly in London again on the Pacific Rim 2 stuff.
Okay.
And then I came back over to Montreal because that's starting to pick up,
Yeah.
as the new hub of visual effects.
Right.
So
Right.
that's how I ended up here. And plus, Eamon just offered me that gig. It sounded cool.
Yeah. Now, I noticed on your bio, you're head of animation and animation supervisor. How
Yep.
are those differ, and what are some of your roles there?
So animation supervisors, I'm just focusing on a show or all the shows. We're kind of small, so I'm in charge of all the shows right now.
Okay.
But if we get a big show, like we're getting a big creature show coming in, so I'll supervise that.
Okay.
A head of animation means that I hire animators, I interview animators, I go over the budget, and I go over scheduling. So I have to, if say a show requests 3 animators, I have to find those 3 animators, put them on the show, or I have to push back and say you can only have 2. And then I also do training activities, that kind of thing, vision for the company, like where we want to go. So right now, as part of my HOD tasks, I'm looking at Ziva. We're developing a muscle system.
Okay.
And then we're also developing a hair and cloth system using Houdini. So we were using Maya, but we're switching to Houdini. So that's something else that I kind of am in charge of, and rigging. So
Okay.
I test all the rigs and update all the rigs. And
what are some of your deciding factors as to why to switch to a different package?
Well, I try to think forward 5 years and what is going to be a more robust solution for the studio.
Mm.
So I'm not smart enough to make those decisions, right? So
Okay.
I ask a lot of the artists. So there's the head of FX, and there was a head of creature effects in London. So we all got together and I talked about what they like and what they don't like, and everybody decided they don't like Maya. They'd rather not work in Maya, and they thought Houdini was just a more long-term solution that could handle hair and cloth better.
Gotcha.
And we did this show called Lock and Key, and we had to do hair and cloth on this CG Dodge character, and it was quite difficult in Maya. And but we had a Houdini solution that worked a little easier.
Gotcha.
So that's what sold me on going forward with Houdini. And Ziva just seems like the more robust muscle package. We looked at a couple other ones, and our head rigger did some tests, and they worked out really well. And they were using it upstairs in feature animation. There's a feature animation upstairs. So I work in visual effects, and there's feature upstairs, and they used it for this film called Extinct.
Okay.
They had it. Yeah. So what they used it in a cartoony way for jiggle.
Oh,
so
how funny.
So they got it wasn't for muscles or anything. It was just for free jiggle.
Oh, nice.
Characters bounce around. They kind of got this secondary.
That's awesome.
That was kind of, I was a bit cheeky. So when I found out they had Ziva licenses for that, I was like, okay. And then can we borrow one?
Yeah.
And so we borrowed one, and then that's how we tested it for muscles.
Now, that Ziva, is that both for Maya and Houdini?
So Ziva is a separate package that runs in Maya. It's basically a plugin for Maya.
Okay, but you guys are looking at using it in Houdini, though.
No. The Ziva will run only in Maya, but then hair and cloth will be Houdini.
Gotcha. That's one of the nice things about these packages. They work well together. I know, from Alembic and things like that, moving stuff back and forth. Even if it's just Cache Geo, you can kind of work together. So that's kind of nice that you're able to use different packages and even different plugins that kind of accommodate what you need to do. Yeah,
definitely. And Ziva is really good about giving you the workflow and how you're supposed to work with it, which is great. They even give a chart, like you're supposed to use this cache here and this cache there and do your work here and blah, blah, blah. And so, but it's real world based. So it's a lot of work up front. So you have to create a skeleton and the muscles, and you have to build it for real.
Oh, gotcha.
If you want it to look real, it has to be built for real. We did a test where we tried to do a quick kind of cheat, and it didn't work.
Okay. Well, how did the feature animation using on that? I'm sure because I've seen the characters, it look like little donuts or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did. So I'm not quite sure how they used it on there. I think there's a jiggle function in Ziva, that acts like there's a certain kind of muscle you can build that just jiggles.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And then on top of it, there's all these other constraints you can put on it to make it look like a real muscle, like to make it attached to the bone and
Oh, okay. I
and all
gotcha.
that. They just didn't do any of that. So they just
Okay.
added this jiggle thing inside and it just bounces around.
Okay. But the stuff that you need it for, you need it to work
Yeah,
real
I
more
need it.
real. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We're working on a project with these seals, and so we need real fat to jiggle and move around. It's cool.
Now, do you enjoy the aspect of what you're doing there as both head of animation and an animation supervisor? You mentioned, having to work with budget and hire, and do you enjoy that full gambit of what you're doing?
Yeah, mostly. Some
Because it would
days
seem like you get, yeah. Sorry.
some days I just want to animate.
Uh,
I always try to carve like what they're okay. So my approach to supervising or HOD is I try to keep all my shots from my team that are cool, give those to them, and then I try to take all the ones nobody wants to work on.
Okay.
But at least I get to do stuff.
There you go. Okay.
So, yeah,
Because I'm
there's
thinking pros
time
and
in my
cons.
schedule.
It'd be nice because you're learning the whole aspect of the industry,
Yeah,
in different portions. I'm sure that's kind of why you got picked up where you're at now. You weren't just a one trick pony, so to speak.
yeah,
But on the other hand, then you're going, yeah, I don't get to animate as much. Maybe.
yeah. I always try to animate because I don't want to get. I don't know. I love it, right? That's
Yeah.
why I still love it very, very much. So I have to do something, even if it's stupid. I have to do something.
There you go.
Even if it's a car, it's like, fine, I'll animate that car and I'll animate it the best I possibly can.
There
That's
you
going to be
go.
the best car in cinema. Yeah, I have to animate. But what I do like about supervising is a big picture thing, right? So it's a more part of the creative process.
Okay.
You get to define a key part in the film overall, looking at it as a holistic picture of where it fits in story-wise. So how this character fits in over the entire length of the film or the series and why that character needs to work that way. So that's what I enjoy about it, is this
Okay.
storytelling point. The HOD stuff I like because I get to deal with young talent. I get to help steer the ship per se. So all the rigs do work for the team. They're user friendly. I can pass that feedback on. So I have a bit more control over how the creatures work finally, and make sure that it helps the team do the best work they can. That's the one reason I got into it, is mostly to help control that the animators can do a good job.
Gotcha.
Because I always find a lot of times I would run up against that and I found it irritating. So I wanted to get into that so I can really help the team do better work. Which is always my goal as a supervisor, is so letting the team do the best work they can. I try to be as hands off as I can. Sometimes you can't. But that's really why I got into it.
Gotcha. What are some of the pros and cons, so to speak, or the challenges of the budding industry there in Montreal?
It's weird because I started in LA, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I was at the forefront of the industry as it was growing up in LA.
Right.
And then I saw it shift to England first, which
Mm-hmm.
I think people forget. It kind of shifted to England, and
Right.
then I shifted with it. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I find that basically everywhere I go is 5 years behind where I was last time. So it was the same thing in England. I got there and they were there for 5 years, but they felt like they were still 5 years behind where Sony was. And to this day, I still think the best rigs I've ever worked on were the ones at Weta, which were ancient, right? But they were really fast, easy. I'm sure they're way better now. But anyway, so that's what I find anywhere I move where the industry is budding, is there's growing pains. They feel like they just don't feel as streamlined and efficient as they were at the last hub.
Okay.
So, eventually by the time I left England, they were up to
Right.
speed and everything was efficient, doing great work and all that other stuff. And then I came back to LA. I went into TV, so I didn't see the Vancouver experience. I didn't have that one, but I had heard from my friends the same kind of
Growing pains.
growing pains. And now in Montreal, it's the same kind of thing, same kind of growing pains. My biggest frustration with Montreal is I wish we got more work. Like I wish the studios would trust us more with bigger projects and giving us larger chunks.
Gotcha.
A large number of shots.
Is that
I don't know if they're there yet.
Is that because they know it's kind of more in its infancy, so to speak? I'm using air quotes for those that are listening by audio.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I think
not to say that you guys can't handle it. I'm just saying maybe is that the perception?
My gut feeling says yes. I don't have any data or anything to
Gotcha.
say that that's true, but I think they're still kind of testing how Montreal does. But Montreal is cool because it has this artistic community, and it's been around a long time doing video games and stuff. So they're not as young as people think they are.
Right.
You know, they've been doing this quite a bit. I know CineSite's been there for 5 years.
Okay.
And then I worked at Framestore while I was in Montreal. I worked on Pikachu.
Okay, I saw that on there.
Yeah, which was awesome. And their pipeline is super robust and efficient. Yeah, and they're quite capable. They have an amazing animation team, one of the best ones I've worked with. A very long time, except my current one. No. Yeah, so they're super like ready to go for big shots. But I know that it's the whole money thing, you know, it's the tax incentives, and London still gives good tax incentives. So, you know, the studios are smart. They'll put shots in London and put shots in Montreal and all that. I saw an interview with the VFX soup on Endgame. I forget his name.
I don't know.
Dan DeLue, I think. I worked with him a long time ago at RNH, I believe. And he said he had to give shots to a whole bunch of studios because it was just so much work. And it makes sense, right?
Yeah,
you don't want to dump 1,500 shots or like 2,400 shots in one studio and then hope it works out. That's a lot of money. So that's my gut feeling, is that they're still testing the waters, but it's definitely ramping up. You know, they want to put work here. I think they're slowly kind of trickling it in, and eventually it's going to be the floodgates are open, and then there's more work than we can handle.
Now, does CineSite London, do you guys work with them as kind of one company, or, and I know it's one company, but I mean, as far as one studio, so to speak, or how you guys handle stuff, is it?
Yeah, so CineSite's, they're pretty cool. It's called a CineSite group. So there's CineSite London and CineSite Montreal, but part of that group is also CineSite Vancouver, and Image Engine, and then in Trickster in Germany.
Oh, okay, I didn't know those ones.
Yeah, so all of those are under the same umbrella.
Interesting.
So Vancouver, Montreal, and London are all set to be on the same pipeline in about 3 months, so we can share shots. We already share shots with London. We're doing a shared show right now. So basically everything syncs. We can load their shots and work on them. They can load our shots and work on them.
Very nice.
And it's seamless. Trickster will soon be up on that pipeline. The only one that won't be is probably Image Engine, because they have a whole bunch of proprietary stuff. So it's harder to move them over.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, yeah.
Now, you said you worked on Detective Pikachu. Where at?
Framestore in Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah.
That looked like a very cool project to work on.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Okay. So what did you enjoy about it?
A couple things. Like, so Pikachu was fun because it's Ryan Reynolds and he's super sarcastic. So that was fun. So I got to do a couple. I was a lead on that. I wasn't a supervisor. The supervisor was in London. So myself and another animator, Phil, had to kind of oversee the team in Montreal and then present the work to the Anim Soup in London and then take notes and come back. So it was this weird lead position. It's not the traditional lead position. But I was also responsible for shots. So they also gave me a ton of shots to do. So that was a lot. So
you got to animate a lot more than
I got to animate a ton. More than I ever wanted to. No, but it was fun. So there was a couple key Pikachu shots that I got to do, which were fun.
Nice.
But I did mostly the A-palms bouncing around, which were these angry purple monkey things.
I saw that on your reel. That was very cool.
Yeah, and those were fun because they were athletic, you know, and they could move in a bit more cartoony way and climb and crawl. We used a lot of monkey reference, obviously. Like I used a ton of monkey reference. But at the same time, they're bouncing around and pushing themselves off with their hands. They have this giant hand tail, and the
Uh,
director was pretty clear that he wanted the locomotion to come from this big hand tail, not necessarily move like monkeys.
Now, notice there's a
So
lot in that shot. Are you animating all of them, or
all of them.
wow? how do you, how do you
Yeah.
start a shot like that? Are you like, okay, which one's leading it? Which one,
Yeah. So there's two big shots I did. The one, and they're two different experiences. So there's one where they fall down on a door, and there's a whole bunch of APOMs who push a door down and they land. And that one I thought of as a group, like that overall shape and how that lands, and then
Okay.
how it moves out. So to me, it had to be a big group that comes and lands on the door and then thrusts out and moves forward. So I thought of that graphically as one element, and then broke up each doing something interesting.
Okay.
And I wanted them crawling over each other and using their big tail hand to like push one down so they could get ahead and all that other stuff. So I wanted them fighting each other, but still functioning as a group.
Uh-huh.
And then the second big long shot, it was the same kind of thing. There was a main element that blew forward from the blast and landed, and then started chasing Pikachu. But then there were other elements to make it more interesting. So it had to look like that there were just APOMs coming out from all corners of the shot. And then one thing that I always do is I try to use as much of the environment as possible. So whatever's on set, if it's a prop or if it's a wall or a chair. So in that particular shot, I tried to have them climb over every single element that was in the plate. So the cages and the walls, and running on the floors, and then bouncing from this one high spot onto a cage, onto the floor. And then I just tried to think of them graphically. So I created this low-res poly representation that was basically just a sphere with a head. And I kind of worked out the general path of where they all go. And then I tried to make it look interesting graphically from like a visual aspect about where I wanted the eye to go and how I wanted it to flow. So basically it's a wave if you watch it flowing through.
Okay.
But made of a whole different elements, like all the APOMs going through. Yeah.
Now I like what I'm hearing in regards to the working with the, you mentioned working with the environment. Is your thought process because it helps ground them in this, makes them feel like they're more in that environment versus just CG elements layered on top of a plate or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. And then, so one advice I got from a senior animator a long time ago was if there's ever a prop, use it.
Gotcha.
Like for acting, if there's a cigarette, never have your character just ignore it. Or if it's a bull, or like, they should interact with their environment, because actors do that. And if you watch films, you'll see that.
Right.
Actors will do weird things. They'll just pick up a cup for no reason, look at it, and put it back down. So I learned that lesson. I kind of take that into everything I do. So if there's anything in the plate that I can utilize, I try to take advantage of it.
No, that's very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Darn it, I had another question on that one and I forgot it. Oh, the length of a shot like that with that many characters, just out of curiosity, how long was like the length of your shot to be able to work on that?
So that was interesting. So we got that whole sequence, and we had a very small team, and we had to block the whole thing out. So I blocked a whole bunch of those shots, and we used pretty rough animation just to get placement and size and speed.
Uh-huh.
And we would run that through the Anim Soup, and then the director was super awesome on that project, and the VFX Soup, which is not often the case, was amazing.
Okay.
Definitely a friend of animation, because he was aware of budget and time. So
okay.
So that one's different because I blocked it, and then I blocked a whole bunch of shots, and then we handed them out for other animators to animate. But that one I kept. So I worked on that maybe a month and a half.
Okay. I figured that would have to be a decent size shot for that.
Yeah, and a lot of overtime. Because I wanted to work on it, right? And I wanted it to be good, and all the hands had to be placed, and they had to be right on the wall, and they had to push off. And we had this amazing tool called it's called a rig physics tool, which, because I'm old school and I hate computers, I resisted. I'm not using that. But once I used it, it was awesome. So what it does is basically you animate the jump. So it doesn't do anything for you. You animate the jump. You have to take the takeoff pose and then the land pose. And then it just calculates what your arc should look like. It just shows you a visual representation of what your arc should look like and what your timing should look like. But then you could pull it up or down and adjust the arc to do it artistically, to make a choice. Then you just hit a button and it snaps your body to that arc, and it tweaks all your timing and spacing so it actually works in real world.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
I was going to say, so it's like an arc tracker, but it's doing more than just that, obviously.
It's not just gravity, and it also assigns the center of gravity, which is cool, right?
Interesting.
So the Apom's had a big old giant head. So the center of gravity is not at the hip, it's at his neck because his head's so big.
Okay. So you've got that kind of balance there, huh?
Yeah, so it kind of calculates based on that center of gravity, not on your hip.
Gotcha.
And it looks at gravity and it tweaks your timing a little bit.
Interesting.
It was a really helpful tool, but the thing is, it doesn't give you anything. You still have to do the jump and figure out artistically where all that goes.
Yeah.
And if you increase the arc, it tweaks your timing in such a way that now all the stuff that happens after that particular jump, you have to tweak as well.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of massaging that you have to do with it, but it was a super helpful tool, especially with that shot.
I can imagine.
The VFX soup was about physics, right? He was the one who wrote that tool, or he developed it. So he would make you show that shot with that tool to make sure everything was
working like that,
realistic. Yeah, which was cool. That's why I resisted it at first. I'm like, oh, computers.
Yeah, but I'm an animator, darn it.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing. I know an arc. Showed me how off my arcs were. Like, okay, you're right.
That's one of the things I enjoy about, this aspect. I remember, I think it was Richard Lico, one of our former game instructors, worked on Halo and such. He, again, going back to motion capture, he was like, I didn't resist it. He goes, it was one of those things that helped me learn great body mechanics because I had to watch it over and over and over again. So when I did keyframe animation, I was very familiar with it, in a 3D environment, not just a flat 2D reference. But I can see on something like that where you're looking at it and you're like, oh, okay, my arc's off here. This is what it should be. And now you're muscle memorying that into your mind so that you don't always need that per se,
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same experience on motion capture. Like once you do motion capture, you see what the curves look like. I'm a nerd, so I would look at the curves a lot. And I'm like, how's that hip moving? What's that curve look like? And I still, to this day, will tweak my curves in such a way where they kind of resemble what that curve looks like in motion capture if I need something real. And it is very helpful and it does work.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so once you start understanding how real world motion is graphically displayed in a graph editor, you can mimic that to tweak your poses and it gives you that realistic timing. It's the same thing with the arc.
Yeah.
Once you run that tool over and over and over again, you can kind of predict what it's going to give you.
Right. You've trained your mind now to look for that.
Yeah. So by the end of production, the more I ran it, it didn't tweak my arc that much.
I could see that.
Minutely. And so it didn't affect the animation after as much. So I wasn't afraid to use it, especially on that shot. I would just use it because I knew it might tweak my animation 1 or 2 frames after, but that's it. It's not that far off.
Yeah.
But it is nice because it helped my workflow. I didn't have to work as hard. It gave me that, and then I can move forward and do other things like fingers and face expressions because I did a whole bunch of goofy face expressions that you can't see. Nice. That was another shot where I would do all this goofy stuff that you can't see in the blur because it was entertaining. Dragging jaws, tongue sticking out, stuff like that.
At least getting to enjoy your job animating it, right?
Oh, yeah. That was a great shot. That was fun.
Very cool. You've been, like I mentioned earlier, one of our creature animation instructors. What is it that you enjoy working in animating creatures? You've been in the industry for quite a long time doing this stuff here. So what is it that you still enjoy about it and teaching it?
So I'm like a weirdo about weight and heavy things. I like big, heavy, scary monster thingies. And that's really only in creature. The only feature animation I've seen that I was interested in was Monsters Inc. And it was Sully because he's big and
Gotcha.
Heavy. And that was the first time I've seen a feature animation. I'm like, oh, that looks heavy. Like, that's cool. So yeah, I like big, heavy things. and that's what attracts me to Creatures.
Gotcha. And still getting to work with the performance and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, storytelling.
Yeah.
I'm big into storytelling. I've always been attracted to like visual effects films. I like animation. I like feature animation, but I love Creatures more. That's just my thing. I was a big Ray Harryhausen fan. I was a big Phil Tippett fan.
Okay.
I got to work with, I always forget his name. Another big stop motion guy, Randy Cook.
Okay.
He's going to kill me if he hears that. I forgot his name. And he was an inspiration. He was the first guy who really told me my animation was garbage.
Okay.
I don't know if he meant that good or bad, but it made me rethink everything, and try even harder. So,
tough love.
Yeah, tough love. He's a tough love dad, but he's an inspiration, because he's a stop motion guy. So I was big into stop motion, big into even the cartoons I like the most are those Rankin-based Christmas specials. They're all goofy and stop motion-y.
Yeah.
So I like that stuff, and that's, I think, like Creatures. And then I like Kong. I like dinosaurs, trolls.
Yeah.
That's why I asked for a troll. When I was at Weta, I'm like, I'll do whatever you want. I just want one troll shot. Like, fine, you can have one. Yeah.
And it also seems like you get a large variety in that part of the industry, from movie to movie. It's pretty different. I mean, I was looking at your bio, you were on Ant-Man and Wasp, and then, Pikachu, and obviously, multiple different creatures in Detective Pikachu, Pacific Rim obviously had its different creatures and stuff like that. So it seems like a good variety of different types of animation style, not style, but how you apply it.
Yeah, I never get bored. And that's another reason I'm a big fan of saying that animation is animation, because I've done cartoons with Open Season. I've done mocap with Beowulf, all at the same studio. So in 9 months, I did Open Season, Narnia, and Beowulf.
God, wow.
Oh, no. Sorry, Monster House. All three of those. So Open Season was straight cartoony animation. Narnia was straight VFX, but character animation. I did the beavers and the wolf.
Yeah.
And then Monster House was motion capture cartoony animation. So that was in 9 months. I did 3 different shows, 3 different styles, 3 different kinds of notes, right? Because the cartoony things, you're getting different notes than you are in the Narnia stuff. And that's what I like about it, is I get to do a whole bunch of things. Hop was very different than Paul. I did Paul, and then right after I did Hop. So yeah, I never get bored. And the nice thing about Creatures is you do get to do the little fast things like 8 Palms, where you can get away with a whole bunch of stuff. And then you get to do giant robots and creatures where you can't get away with anything, because you can see every frame because they move so slow, but they still have to be heavy. Yeah.
Have you been enjoying? Go ahead.
Huh? I was just going to say, with Netflix, it's even more interesting, because now they're, they take chances as far as like some of the creatures. The shadow creatures probably wouldn't be in a film that way, just because they're kind of the secondary character, but they're important, but they're for one episode, but they spend a lot of time and money making them look really, really good. The level is the same as film.
Nice.
It's not the old days where TV, you could get away with it. Netflix doesn't work that way.
Gotcha.
They expect Game of Thrones quality. Or film quality, they expect high-end stuff, so which is cool.
Very cool. You've been at Montreal for how long?
3 years, 3.5 years.
Okay. Enjoying it? Feel like that's home now?
Yeah, well, nothing's ever home. I'm a citizen of the world. You never know where you're going to end up in this business. Right? I've been to Weta. I've been in New Zealand, in London, LA, Montreal. Apparently Germany and Australia are next on the list, So yeah, Montreal's super cool. It's very artsy. Reminds me of New York in a way.
Okay.
A lot of street art. Everybody here is heavily tattooed and friendly and metropolitan, and there's a metro, and so it's very cool. I don't like winter.
Yeah.
I don't like snow.
I was visiting Jason right up there about November, and it was starting to get really cold, and he's like, you wait.
Yeah, no, it's brutal. I was born and raised in LA, so I still say to this day, I'm just not built for it.
Yeah, SoCal's a little bit different winters then.
Yeah, yeah. You don't have to think about what you're wearing when you go out. You just go outside.
If you want to grab a sweatshirt, you can grab a sweatshirt, and that's it.
Yeah, but it's for fashion. You want to look cool.
Montreal, you're layering up, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The winters get rough. This one wasn't so bad. Knock on wood. Last one was brutal.
I thought last year was pretty bad, right?
Oh my God. It was all ice everywhere, just slipping and sliding. It was an ice rink. Yeah.
Your hockey stick.
No bueno.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I really do appreciate your time. It's been too long that not getting you on this, and all of a sudden I was looking, I'm like, man, we haven't had one with you on here, and looking at your latest reel, it was really cool. And the fact that, we get guys like you who are currently up at the top echelon of, big studios like this, and being able to teach our students is a neat opportunity. So I enjoy getting to talk with you guys and pick your brain, and hope everybody else does. So again, appreciate your time on this.
Oh, thank you. Anytime, man. It was fun.
Awesome. All right. Stay safe, and we'll look forward to another time here, man.
All right. You too. Thanks, man.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.